Good morning. We'll move on to election slide. The total published budget remains relatively constant for 2013, 14, and 15, and that's just due to there's not a presidential election until 2016. The budgeted tax support also remains relatively flat, and then the budgeted FTEs have remained at 16. The election office did request one elections manager that was not funded, an elections management system as a CIP project, and that was funded at $200,000. Voting machine CIP at $12.8 million, and that was not funded in the 5-year CIP. It was requested for 2017, and so that's not in the 5-year plan as of right now, but it was also not a 2015 request. It was actually a 2017 request. The primary performance measures are listed also. And then just a few key points: the new voting machines that are needed, resistance from schools as polling locations, and then availability of potential advanced voting sites has reduced as economy has improved. At this point, I'll turn it over to the chair for any questions.
Okay. Mr. Newby, any comments you'd like to make?
Well, yes. First of all, I want to introduce Jessica White from our office as well, who's here. But I think that the key thing for us, or really, well, there's 2 points. They're sort of related, but the voting machine issue, I think, does have to be addressed. I mean, it's really, if I got anything out of this year, I want to see that we have a plan for that. And I'd like to talk about that. And then second, the FTE aspect, we have requested headcount for years. We've not grown for years, 20 years. And I really don't know what it takes to make that happen, I have to say. I saw a discussion in an earlier video about, is this a process that's an appeal? Well, I would have to say, yeah, because in this case, we request something that we say is needed for maintaining services. It comes back as a medium priority for enhanced services. That's all that we're ever communicated. I don't agree of how that became a shift. And year after year, we're always in this mode. I don't know what it takes to move that needle. I seriously don't know, other than at some point, and I think it ties to the machines as well, some point of failure, and then that's not acceptable. So I think it's a very modest thing to consider that we need a head count for the growth and voters, all the different issues. That's one side. And beyond being able to ask for it and not know the magic word or the magic formula, I have to go back and say we're almost at a point of having to call statute. We have statutes that we don't really follow in the county. I think we treat statutes more like an idea rather than law at times. And maybe that's really what we need to do. I've asked for a proposal from an outside firm to do a statute audit of going through the entire 19 series and also the 25 series to ask to look and see how we do compared to the statute, what that really means. Waiting for a proposal. But I think that's one thing that we may need to consider, because it's very frustrating to come here, and if we don't ask for something, then we're probably told later we must not need it. If we ask for it, it's a lot of resources that we expend to go through the process, only to year after year after year not get it. So those 2 things I'd like to confront in this time we have.
Okay. Well, let's talk about them. We've talked about them. Mm-hmm. Talked about them earlier. As to the FTE, and in our earlier conversations, you indicated you've had 1 or 2 positions vacant for some time, and I guess I'd be looking. Obviously, they're still funded in your budget, even though they're vacant. What revenues are still in the budget related to those vacant positions? Have you been able to identify that?
Well, I guess, and the vacancies are not by choice. It's just that's how long the process is taking to fill them. But with, I think realistically, we won't have those filled now based on what I think of the process for another 2 months. And if that's the case, then we've got 8 months of one and about 4 months of another. So the equivalent of a year, probably very similar. I mean, I think it'd be a swag, of course, but a very similar amount to an annual amount, what we've asked for here, $65,000, which would be with
that's what I was trying to get to.
Right.
Is that based upon those numbers, this position could be funded with the allocated or budgeted numbers
That would only be on a one-time basis. And then ongoing, it would increase your, and we usually don't fund ongoing expenditures with one time, but.
But for 2015.
Right, but for 2016 ongoing, then that would be an ongoing ad valorem support that we would have to find from somewhere else.
Okay. Well, that's on my revisit.
Well, and actually, in 2015, if they go ahead and fund those, then we wouldn't have the funding. The funding for 2014 is there, and that falls to reserves. But for 2015, if those positions are filled, we don't have the funding in his budget.
Well, but the funding is there.
If we would use one-time reserves,
Just a different name.
we have to, right, we would have to go ahead and put in his budget that we're using reserves to fund that position 1 year, and then ongoing, we'd have to find another.
But if the unused personnel cost is going to fall to reserves, then and you pull it out,
Well, yeah, and
you're even.
I would remind the board that we were facing an approximate $3 million shortfall in the sheriff's budget, and we plan to use any vacancy money that we can to help address that and mitigate the impacts on our fund balance, which is below 3% now and below the Moody's recommended guidelines for AAA counties.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll note, I want to revisit on that. We also talked about the voting machines, and we don't know at this point in time what that animal is going to look like. You indicated that you did have some capital funds that you wanted to go out for an RFP to begin to analyze the market and what you need in that regard.
Well, yeah, I think there's a few things. In fact, one thing Scott said sort of leads to one item I want to make sure everybody knows, that first of all, let's go back in history. One of the things with voting machines, and where it says we requested them in 2017, this has been something we've requested with that amount for years. And in fact, was in the 5-year view in the CIP in the 2011 budget. So it was looked at in the 2015. And then it was changed the following year and then taken out starting 2012. And so one of the reasons we were told it was taken out was because of the uncertainty with voting machines and what we would do. We have a quote. We didn't just make up a $12.8 million number. We have a quote of what we would do. And gun to our head, if our systems were to go bad today, that's what we would do. So that's a real thing. The RFP process, what we were told through the capital improvement process, was that if we needed a process to select this next generation. So we've come up with the process, and I'm kind of reacting to what I heard on I think the 6th of June here, where the county manager said, we're waiting with great anticipation for what's being advocated by the election commissioner, and then we'll get that funded, or get that budgeted. Didn't say funded, he said get that budgeted. Well, I would argue, I don't think we start talking about what we need from a building. We don't know who's going to build the elevator, but we know we're going to need an elevator. Now, if the idea is that we're going to put out to bid and select a provider, that's what I've decided we're going to start doing. So I'm going to identify a consultant to help us with the RFP and that process. And I'd like to take that funding, and I believe it can be taken out of the voting equipment replacement fund that we have not funded for several years, but we have $900,000 or so in it, and start that process to come back to the board and say, okay, and I think it's probably about this time in 2016. That's kind of the time frame, with the idea that we would convert and implement that system in 2017. Now, that means that there's got to be money that comes up for that. If the idea of being budgeted means once we identify that's the new broom of the Wicked Witch of the West and we're starting from scratch again, then if we're saying that's when we'll start the process to look how we're going to fund it, and 5 years out, the systems aren't going to last that long. And I look at what's in the capital budget, and I look at the tax that would be required to drop in something of that size. Or if you were to say we're going to do it by debt, and if you take out all the debt, and I may be wrong about this, but I think if you take out all the debt that has funding, there's only about less than $2 million that's carried year to year. I don't think the debt service could absorb $12 million, or even if you split it among $3 million, maybe 3 for 4 years, something like that, and I don't know how the debt could be done. I don't think that could be absorbed without a property tax increase or some offsetting of $12 million. So I think it's a bit incredulous, frankly, to say, well, all we need to do is come back and say what we're going to do, and then we'll get it budgeted. I don't think there is a plan to fund it. And that may be okay, but there is going to be a day when I'll be standing over there like other people have and said, we're in a crisis, and if we don't make a decision today, we've got to buy this. And then the people up here are going to say, why did this just come up today? And it's going to be a $12 million number, which to me is kind of large. So I think, I'm not expecting that you're going to put $12 million in the capital budget, but I think that this is a discussion that has to happen. And I think we keep putting it off. We use uncertainty as a way to not address the issue. And that's unfair to our voters and unfair to the election office, unfair to me. And I think we've got to confront that.
Okay. Well, let me ask this question. To use the capital fund for the voting machines in order to accomplish this evaluation, is that an actionable item that we need to take?
Yeah, we would probably need to come back because that was set up specifically for the purchase of voting machines and no other use of that. And so we would have to, we'd just come forward and then the board would decide to go ahead and revise that CIP to fund it or to use it for whatever you deem necessary.
Okay.
Right. If
Well,
I could,
I'll put that on my revisit list also.
Okay.
we've used money out of that already beyond other things, so to pay for electrical service and to pay for tables to store the machine. So there's plenty of precedence to use it for other things besides just purchase of voting machines.
Actually, precedence doesn't make it right. What we need to do is adhere to the general description that the board approved. And so if we're going to fundamentally change what we're doing with that money, it's just a Thursday agenda item. It's well within your purview. If it's the board's pleasure to do that, we can do it. But precedent doesn't make it right for us to substantially change your original appropriation. We would need you to change that. So that's what we would do.
Okay.
If I may, I would point out something else on that if precedence doesn't make it right. There was, when that fund was created, there was an offset of capital that the Board of County Commissioners elected to put in every year in voting equipment replacement fund. In the budget cut cycle that we had for 2011, that money was stopped with the idea, and I have it in writing, that it would come back in 12. We did not have it in 12. We did not have it in 13. We did not have it in 14. It's not in the 15. And that in itself would be $1.6 million. Now, I can understand why that wouldn't be in, but I don't think the Board of County Commissioners was ever told that that was in and a change was made and it was no longer put in.
I was aware of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that. I think quite frankly the issue is the board will fund the requirements that are necessary to carry on the appropriate election activity in this county. And personally, I would look forward to a plan enumerated, identified, as to what kind of equipment is going to be used and what the additional cost would be. And, we could, in theory, set aside an amount this year and next year, which would be de minimis in regards to what the total cost might be. And so I guess my view, let's make sure we know what we're going to do, what we're going to use, how it's going to work, and then we can address the funding.
But when would that be? I mean,
Well,
does that address the funding the year we need it, or does that mean we'll address it with a view that won't support, the time frame won't support the life of the machines we have?
I'm suggesting that the completion of the RFP and the work you indicated you would like to do would be the decision point, and would be the final decision point anyway, because I don't see this board making a decision about the voting equipment until we know exactly what that's going to be and what the cost is going to be. So I guess I would look at it as coinciding with the results and the review of the recommendation for the type of equipment and program that's necessary.
In the CIP request, the election office does state that they'll focus on the bring your own voting machine concept with vendors and seek to incent a vendor to create such a solution, and that they'll focus first on achieving a non-traditional, innovative, and cost-saving solution. So I agree, once that comes forth, then we'll be able, I believe that was part of the restraint on the CIP committee, is once we see those ideas and plans.
Say, though, that I just came back from an MIT Caltech conference with about 30, truly, the brightest minds in election administration, and we're lucky that we have a seat at that table. There's a magazine, just comes out, Discover, that lays out the Travis County plan, and that's one of the proposals, part of the proposal we're going to submit. I may want to drive a car that will go 400 miles on electricity, but if that kind of car doesn't exist, when I have to buy a car, I'm going to go back and buy what exists. And what we will be doing is we will submit an RFP that will ask for a solution that is the way that Robin said, but also asking for a traditional solution. The solution that we have in there is probably one that will not be relevant by the time that we need to buy. And so I just want to stress to you that we will come back, and it probably will be a very traditional solution. It probably will be in that $13 million mode, and we will be against the clock. That's really what I'm worried about, is if we come and that's 2016, it sounds like we don't need to go through the CIP process again, because you're saying bring it to the board after we've selected. Then I think the discussion is, when would it be funded? And I get what you're saying, but I just feel like we've gone down this path at times to where we've had a quote and nothing's happened. I just feel like there's always a reason why we can't move forward, and we're going to run out of time.
Well, I think our discussion has led to a point of moving forward, as you have outlined. Questions, Mr. Peterson?
Brian, last year when we discussed the issue of the future, or maybe it's more recent than that, but you've indicated, I think, that there are no certified alternatives to the machines that we have right now. Is that still the case?
No, there are 3 vendors who have been certified federally, and if they haven't been in Kansas, they soon will be, and I think they all have been. They are all paper-based systems, which still are the same cost level that we're looking at in the budget, because we don't have scanners, and they still have costs. They're kind of a ballot marking device, paper-based. So there are solutions that exist today. They're again in that same price point, so that's probably where we still are, in the $13 million. And that's just for the equipment. That's not for the paper that we'd have to print annually.
But what you're telling me that the technology is taking us back to the paper ballot, is that?
Yes, because
correct?
there are voluntary voting system guidelines that all consider to be mandatory, and the way the guidelines were written by the Election Assistance Commission, it almost prohibits anything but paper. Now, what we're trying to do is determine if we can come up with, as we put in the request, a solution that can bypass that certification process. I'm optimistic we can, but I don't know that it's going to be one that I guess will play in Peoria. This is a big deal. If this system that Travis County implements, then we can piggyback off it. My hunch is we may be needing to implement before they implement, because we were the first community in the country to have voting machines at the polls.
I get, where I feel like we're in a chicken and egg type of situation, and I tend to agree with you. I think we should have been taking steps to financially prepare ourselves better than where we are. And I'd like to revisit the issue of whether we need to be including money in each budget in anticipation of what we know is going to be a future expense, even though we may not know today what that's going to be. I guess, but I think you have to appreciate it's real hard to move forward on this side of the bench without some vision of where we're going. And I'm willing to start setting aside some money and creating a fund, but I'm kind of reluctant to commit to a $12 million expenditure without really having a clue about what kind of voting system we're buying for that,
I completely
agree. I hope you can appreciate that.
I completely agree. My thought here is, for God and everyone here, I want to make sure we discuss this in a public meeting and that we have a plan to go forward so that as we come back with that recommendation, then we can say, hey, we have something here, watch the video. This is what was said then, that we're going to start going and figure out how we're going to pay for it. My worry, though, is that that will only be the next gate. And my biggest message is that at some point we're going to run out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Klicka?
Brian, I understand your frustration, okay? And I've seen it in a lot of different areas here that we keep kind of pushing back on a lot of items here. And they're all in a number of different ways. Many things are coming to a head. But I probably agree from the chairman's standpoint and Commissioner Peterson's standpoint. As far as the election machines go, I don't have a grasp yet of what we're dealing with here. I understand you hollering about saying these things are going to have to be replaced, but I don't have a feel as far as where we're going. And that needs to be articulated, and I would probably yield to, I know my colleague here to my right continues to say, hey, do we have the proper technology in place? Are we looking at the next 10 years and 20 years of what we're doing? And I'd go a step further. Have we taken a look at, are there any laws that need to be changed along the way to allow some flexibility? Are we going to be more into online voting, things like that? And so I guess maybe I'm a little further ahead as far as thinking out that if you say these machines are 15 to 17 years out, I don't have a crystal ball what 17 years from now is going to look like. Heavens, I'm not sure where I'll be then. But the fact of the matter is we need some direction and guidance so we can at least get a picture of what we're dealing with and what the options are.
Well, 17 years from 2015 is 2032, and as you know, that's a presidential election year. And it is. And I have, in all seriousness, I have focused much of our discussion and energy around that year. Mm-hmm. We've had planning discussions. No one knows the answers to what you're saying. Really, I can't say it enough. We're lucky that we are considered kind of the small group of forward thinkers. I feel like that, we've got to kind of walk the walk there. But I get what you're saying. I think that my concern, we're going to go through the process that I've said. My concern is that when we come back and it's 2016, that we're having discussions then about, wow, that's a big number. How are we going to afford that? And I don't know the answer to that. All I want to do is raise it. I think all the things you're saying is what I think is going to bear out in this process that I'm discussing.
And I think to a certain degree, Brian, that's what I'm waiting for.
Right.
I just want to feel more educated before all of a sudden we say, hey, we got a budget this much down the line. And I too, like you, am afraid if we keep putting these things off, we will have a crisis on our hands. And I'd like to avoid that also.
I feel like I'm Commissioner Osterhaus making the joke that winter is coming. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Is that I feel like if we don't, my mission today was to make this a public discussion, and I get everything all of you were saying. I would be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that we're kind of all getting our hands locked together about how we're going to deal with this.
I guess that, like my fellow commissioner was alluding to on a previous item we were discussing, we have a mortgage tax issue that we've got to deal with. We've got the election, we've got a courthouse, we've got a sheriff's office, the unknowns, we have all these things seem to be hanging out there, and how we're going to put our arms around it, I'm still in quandary on. But I do hear what you're saying. Okay.
I feel like that. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newby, you mentioned something about an interest in doing, and I think you used the term, a statutes audit?
Yes.
Well, can you elaborate on that a little bit? What would that entail?
I think a few things. There's two series of statutes, 19 and 25. 19 is the role of the election commissioner as it relates to just the processes and responsibilities. and 25 is the process related to elections, the conduct of elections. So on this 25 series, I believe there are things that need to be revised, such as a city can make an annexation 60 days before an election, which is only 15 days before military ballots must go out. So that 60 days really probably needs to be 105 days. And I think going through and identifying things that need to be modernized or eliminated, which might also take out administrative issues for us. And so that I want to do that. And then I have a proposal that we can take to our legislators to say, look, here's an outside group that has looked at this, so it's not just what we've said, and endorsed it. On the 19th side, and I think this is just the Johnson County culture, I can't describe it any other way, we treat the statutes more like ideas than laws. And so what we do, the way we do our budgeting in Johnson County is different than, say, in Wyandotte County or Shawnee County, where the election commissioner by statute comes in and says, this is what I need, and the board is supposed to do that. There are good things and bad things about the way we do it. We do it more of a team-based approach. I don't know if that's the right way, but there are certain things in the statute that I want us to explore and I think would help us. Specifically, one allows us, and I've advocated this for a long time, one allows us to have a separate line item, in essence a tax levy. I'm not proposing an increase in tax, but it lets us have a tax levy line item for elections on the property tax bill. So I think it is a good thing that people could see how much they pay for elections, good or bad. They can argue that that's too high or too low, and you could have it itemized on the bill, and that might be a way to adjust the way you're looking at your future tax situation. Another thing that I believe, based on the statutes, and I'm pretty sure this is possible, but I want to have somebody look at it from a legal mind to tell me why it's not possible. I believe that we can have a situation where all costs are borne by an entity, not a friends of, not a nonprofit, but some sort of entity, some sort of holding company within the county. And then for every election, those fixed costs are billed back to us that we pass through to whoever we had the election for. So if we have it on a county-wide basis, we bill those back to the Board of County Commissioners. But we also then are able to do that to the jurisdictions. Right now, we can only bill them incremental costs. If we can find a way to build those fixed costs, salaries, suitcases, voting machines, scanners, then I believe that we will be able to recover more lawfully from the jurisdictions. So that's another aspect of what I want to do.
Well, Mr. Newby, I would confess that I'm not sure I'm tracking with you 100%, but I think the intention of your discussion is appropriate. So I personally would encourage you or us to consider a statute audit, if that's the right terminology, because it would also seem to suggest that it would play into the future technologies and options that we use and what statutory changes may or may not be necessary. Now, you know this much better than I do, but just on the supposition that some of those statutes were possibly written before, the combustion engine was in use, they may not necessarily appreciate the full abilities of current technologies or technologies in the next 5, 10, 17 years, as you point out. So do that, and I think we should consider it. But let me change gears, if I may. On one of your requests was for a staffing, and I can't remember the title. What was a manager?
Election manager.
Election manager. Well, I wanted to double check. One of the things in the Matrix report from a couple of years ago had talked about potential savings associated with combining the logistics and operation functions. Have you considered that? Have you done that? Did you have savings from that? Is there an opportunity there?
Well, I think just as I would say sometimes we treat the statutes as an idea, I mean, with all respect, the Matrix is an idea for us because the way we need to structure and focus our organization is based on statute and what I think we need to get done. I did have discussions with Alan Pennington at the time to discuss that, what he discussed with span of control. And I don't know that he ever made a note in the report, I have an email that he was going to, that the positions didn't really reflect that or the report didn't reflect the number of part-time and election workers that are also led by those groups. So, for instance,
They are mentioned.
yeah.
in
So
there.
someone who has, at the time, 2 persons in a span of control really has another 2,500 that he has to chase down. Now, what I did and this is part of the frustration of the opening positions, in a presidential election, it lets you see the cracks, the stress points. And in 2008, I felt the stress points were facility-based, and we addressed a lot of those. Facilities helped us, and we worked through a lot of those. In 2012, I thought it really demonstrated the staffing constraints that we had, and it was clear that if we don't get staff, we're going to have to do things differently. And I have to live in the environment. We're not going to get it. I mean, what would suggest I am? So we embarked upon an organizational change that we're trying to push through, where it's not really going to address the span of control, really, but it's going to create more, it sort of does, but it really is more of recognizing the long-term talent needs we're going to need. So we're trying to break out more of a technology orientation separate, because I'm seeing across the country election offices are becoming more and more, that's their focus, because you've got electronic poll books and all kinds of other things. So good ideas in the Matrix report, but I think we've kind of taken another leap, and I'm trying to plan out what to do.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. House.
I just wanted to add my voice to the revisit list for the election manager position, and then Brian, maybe offline we can have a little more in-depth conversation about that.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Peterson?
Well, this is not exactly budget related, but can you update us on where we are with the suspended voters in Johnson County?
Yes. I'm trying to go from memory so I give you the right numbers. But overall, I think in the state, there's somewhere around, and I'll try and do this as fast as I can, but I think it's good for everybody to hear the latest.
18,000?
Probably, yeah, I was going to say 20,000.
I thought I read that in the paper as late as yesterday.
Statewide, within Johnson County, that's about 4,000. That number will get bigger every month because it really needs to be $43.95. I knew there was a reason Jessica needed to be up here. $43.95. And so, but that number's going to get bigger every month because it happens at the Driver's License Bureau, and they're not dealing with the root cause, and that is a big deal. So anyway, that number's going to keep going up. Now, what we do on our side is we follow up with letters, we follow up with robocalls, and the one thing I want to hit, though, is that of the $43.95, the number who are in this bifurcated have to vote a federal ballot, and that only part will count. That's roughly 60. So the $43.95 is sometimes said that that's all of them. Now, 60 still, that's an issue. And what will happen as that number goes up too is they will not be in the book when they come in to vote, so they will cast a provisional ballot. Then we will come to the Board of County Commissioners and say that or Board of County Canvassers and say that we can only count the federal race. So that's the status of that. Our biggest worry will be if somebody starts to send a message that probably will not get to the people they're trying to send a message to, and use the federal form on a registration drive, and that 60 balloons to 500, 1,000. We don't want that.
Will of the 43.95 or whatever the number is, will they be voting provisional if they vote, or will they not be allowed to vote?
They would vote provisionally. There's a opportunity for them, if they voted in advance, to knock it all out at once, because proof of citizenship has to be provided before Election Day. Now, one of the things about the 43.95 is, I would say, because this has gone on now for a year and a half, probably 1,500 or so, just a swag, are no longer in Johnson County. So people move, and we can't remove them because they are legally registered. So we have a long process with mail and all that. So what we're going to do is send a separate letter to the 43.95 or however many it is at the time, and say, hey, here's how, if you want to vote, get on the stick, and here's how you can do it. And with the whole purpose of working those that get returned, so we can start what is really a 4-year process to get them removed. So that at least of the 43.95, those people who moved and aren't part of Johnson County anymore eventually will be removed legally.
I take it we'll have a new category of provisional ballots to consider.
Perhaps. Like it will be, yes, it will be.
Okay, thank
yes.
you.
Okay, Mr. Allen.
Just one final comment. Brian, again, I do appreciate your passion, but I think in fairness to the county manager and the staff, and I think the majority of the board, the hesitancy's been is, and my concern as an elected official is if we authorize and spend $12-13 million on this equipment, and then a law is passed, and we have to scrap that and do something else. And I think that's been the hesitancy in the past. I will agree, we can only wait so long and everything else, but I think that's what the majority of the board up here was concerned about, and I'm kind of like the chairman and the rest of them up here is, if something needs to be done, the county has the resources. If we have to buy equipment and do it, we can bond it, it can be taken care of. But I think the main thing as we go through this process, and as long as I'm convinced that whatever we're doing can last or address something for a reasonable amount of time, I don't have any problem with it. But I think the reluctance has been, frankly, is just spending that equipment and then finding out they pass some national law, they're going to standardize voting equipment throughout the country. And that may or may not happen, but I won't disagree. Somewhere along the line, we're going to have to. So I think that's the big difference. I don't think it's anything personal. There's nothing else. I just think there's hesitancy because of the uncertainty. And if it's more certain they're going to leave it alone and nothing's going to happen, I think there'll be much more support to go ahead and address that.
Right. I feel like, and I think that's logical. I've had discussions with Dean Logan, LA County, because I think he and I would be in the same boat. Neither of us want to be known as somebody who recommends something that doesn't stand the test of time or was a waste of money. And I believe that by sometimes laying out all the potential risks, because I'm so concerned about that, I think I hurt myself, I hurt us by raising the issue making it look like there's all this uncertainty. I'm convinced I will not present anything that is going to be usurped by a law. My biggest concern was when it wasn't mentioned in here are things that aren't mentioned in the CIP, and it's the only thing over $3 million that wasn't included. Yeah, I was worried that an out of sight, out of mind. It may be a thought that, well, it's somewhere it's taken care of. We're not thinking about it, and then I just don't want to be standing over there having you guys ask me, why didn't you bring this up sooner?
Okay, understand.
Thank you.
Okay, well, there will be revisits, so thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add, I just want a point of clarification. There was a question sort of put forward that when the study's done, then the board that would come directly to the board, and of course results and certainly could. But our standard practice would be for the results of a study like that and a major capital investment like that to come back through the budget process and through the CIP process.
No, I think that goes unsaid.
Well,
good question.
But what would the purpose of that be?
Pardon?
What would the purpose of going to the CIP committee be if you've said come to you with a proposal? I'm just asking what value would be added.
Because the commission has to take action on it. Mr. O'Neill does engineering studies all the time that he comes to us for authorization to finance. It's the same process, fairly simple, it seems to me, once the information is available. So, okay.
My concern, and that's why I want to lay it out, I believe that will be the next gate, and the CIP committee at the time would not agree with the recommendation, and therefore that we'll be there.
I would encourage you not to speculate too far down the line. My sense is there's support for the RFP and the information on the system. And once that's validated and in hand, then we can move forward on the funding. So,
okay, perfect.
All right, thank you. I'm going to suggest we go ahead with Treasury and Financial Management. We have wastewater scheduled at 1 o'clock, which could be a lengthy process. And so let's hang in there. And maybe you'll have 5 or 10 minutes for lunch.
I think as long as Tom, moves it along, we'll be fine. So we'll put it all on Tom.
Okay, Ms. Friedel, are you up?
Hi. Yes, I'm up, and at the table with me is Tom Franzen and Amy Meekerberg, and we're first going to talk about motor vehicle. For 15, the budget is $4.6 million. That's what we're proposing. The tax support shows a decrease from 14 to 15 to only $85,000. This does not include cost allocation, and that would be because we included $640,000 in the proposed budget from that $5 per transaction fee. The budgeted FTEs are proposed to remain constant at 68. The performance measures are listed on the slide, and the key points are primarily the $5 fee that I discussed and to continue to work with technology to streamline processes. And I turn it over to the chair for questions.
Okay, Mr. Franzen, any comments you'd like to make?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good afternoon, Tom Franzen, Treasury and Financial Management. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about kind of the state of where motor vehicle is and then allow you to ask any questions you might have. And first, I'd like to start by thanking the board for your support over the years of motor vehicle. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been the last couple of years, but you've done a great job of supporting staff, which in turn helps support providing that service to the community. That's very important for us. First, the state of the motor vehicle operation in Johnson County has stabilized, and I tell you that because if you recall